Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we are diving into one of the most fascinating intersections of engineering, culture, and honestly, pure groove in modern history. We're going to unpack the mechanics of an incredibly iconic 1980s music production hub. I am so pumped to take you through this today because we're going to look at music not just as an art form, but as a highly deliberate, meticulously crafted recipe. Think about it. When we hear those defining tracks of the 1970s and 80s, the ones with those unmistakable grooves that instantly get your foot tapping, it's super easy to assume it was just magic, right? Like a bunch of talented people stumbled into a room, hit record, and bam, lightning struck. But what if I told you that wasn't the case at all? How do you actually build a sound that defines an entire decade? Today I want you to think about sound not as some happy accident, but as a totally calculated feat of engineering.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Listen to these words from Chris Blackwell, the visionary founder of Island Records. I wanted a new, progressive-sounding band, a Jamaican rhythm section with an edgy mid-range and a brilliant synth player. He's not just describing a vague vibe here, he is literally outlining a schematic. He knew exactly what sonic frequencies and cultural elements he needed to mash together to create something the world had absolutely never heard before. That one sentence, that's the entire thesis driving our exploration today.
So, to really understand how this sound was built, we're going to unpack this recipe step by step. We'll start with Blackwell's vision, then look at building the Bahamian laboratory, meet the Compass Point All-Stars, break down the anatomy of the sound, and finally wrap up with the Compass Point legacy.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Blackwell's Island Records vision.
Now, to understand the sound, we really have to understand the architect behind it. Chris Blackwell wasn't just some record executive sitting behind a desk. He actively shaped the direction of the music he was releasing. And this brilliantly illustrates his engineering mindset, which he actually proved first with Bob Marley and the Wailers. When he heard their album Catch a Fire, he recognized it was this massive progression in Jamaican music. But to break them to a global audience, he deliberately pitted Jamaican roots against rock production. He remixed and polished Catch a Fire to sound much more like a black rock guitar band. He added elements like a clavinet hooked up to a wah-wah pedal, which gave the keyboards this really funky, electric guitar-like voice, just to bridge the gap for rock listeners who really weren't used to reggae. And it was a massive, massive success.
That entire strategy led to his guiding philosophy, take the music out of Jamaica without taking Jamaica out of it. Blackwell was an intentional cultural crossover engineer. He figured out that if you take the foundational rhythms of one culture and carefully graft them onto the production styles and instrumentation of another, you don't just get a simple hybrid, you invent an entirely new musical language.
Moving right along to Section 2, building the Bahamian laboratory.
Every mad scientist needs a lab, right? Let's look at the physical space required for this sonic alchemy. Blackwell originally founded Island Records way back in 1959, but by 1977, he decided to build a dedicated recording facility, Compass Point Studios, located just 16 kilometers west of downtown Nassau in the Bahamas. Now, this wasn't just a room with some expensive microphones. The whole concept was to create an isolated, idyllic environment supported by an in-house team dedicated to a very specific, instantly recognizable style. By 1980, he had assembled his ultimate in-house session band. This studio literally became a sanctuary. It was entirely removed from the hectic distractions of London or New York, allowing artists to just fully immerse themselves in this carefully engineered environment.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 3, the Compass Point All-Stars.
If the studio was laboratory, these musicians were the highly reactive chemicals mixed inside it. This wasn't just some random jam band. Blackwell handpicked specific cross-cultural talents to fill exact frequency bands and stylistic roles. I mean, look at this lineup. On drums and bass, you've got Sly Dunbar and Robbie Shakespeare, literally the absolute titans of Jamaican reggae rhythm. Then on guitar, you add Barry Reynolds, bringing this edgy British rock sensibility. And finally, on synths, the French-African wizard Wally Badarou. Do you see the calculation here? Reggae foundation, rock mid-range, electronic top end. It was a wildly deliberate multinational assembly designed to execute Blackwell's vision flawlessly.
All right, Section 4, Anatomy of the Sound.
So the crucial point is, how do these distinct pieces actually fit together? Well, here is the literal three-step formula that Blackwell engineered to create this totally unique 1980s vibe.
Step 1, the foundation. Sly and Robbie laid down these incredibly deep, organic, unshakable Jamaican grooves. That is your heartbeat. Step 2, you introduce the edgy mid-range guitars. This perfectly cut through that heavy bass, giving the tracks a real rock and roll bite and attitude. And then Step 3, you glaze the whole thing with brilliant futuristic synth keyboards from Wally Badaru. The result? A sound that was somehow deeply earthy and organic, but also entirely futuristic and electronic, all at the exact same time.
The sources actually describe the sonic signposts of this era with this incredible contrast. It was a totally deliberate mixture of light and dark, heavy and easy. You had this visceral, sweat-drenched rhythmic power acting as the anchor, while these sweeping, icy electronic textures just floated right over the top. It was pleasure and pain, resistance and love, all engineered into one single stereo mix. When you hear it, you literally feel the island heat, but you also feel the neon glow of an 80s nightclub. It's a total sensory contradiction, but it somehow just works perfectly.
And finally, Section 5, the compass point legacy.
Now, what's really fascinating here is that once this sonic recipe was perfected, the entire world came knocking. Just look at the incredible diversity of massive artists traveling down to Nassau specifically to bottle this magic. You had the avant-garde disco funk of Grace Jones on legendary albums like Warm Leatherette and Nightclubbing. You had the gritty soul of Joe Cocker. You even had Chris Frantz and Tina Weymouth of Talking Heads forming the Tom Tom Club and creating the massive hit, Genius of Love, right there in that studio. Robert Palmer, Mick Jagger, even heavy rock acts like AC/DC recorded Back in Black at Compass Point. The sound was so versatile, yet so distinctly Compass Point, that it just elevated everything from pop soul to new wave to hard rock.
But, well, physical laboratories don't last forever. And September 2010, Compass Point Studios officially ceased operations. They cited a series of socio-political happenings in the Bahamas that basically made it untenable to continue doing business. The walls where all this incredible magic happened finally went quiet. But while the physical studio space met a tragic end, the legacy of that sound, that incredibly specific engineered recipe, far outlived the laboratory itself. It fundamentally altered the DNA of pop, dance, and rock music forever.
Which really leaves us with this final provocative thought. We live in an era today where anyone can synthesize literally any sound on a laptop, right in their bedroom. But could today's hyper-digital music landscape ever replicate the organic, deliberate magic of an in-house studio band like the Compass Point All-Stars? Can dragging and dropping digital files ever truly replace the friction, the cultural collision, and the sheer human engineering of putting a reggae bassist, a British rock guitarist, and a French African synth player in a room in the Caribbean and just telling them to invent the future? It is definitely something to think about the next time you put your headphones on. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.